Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. And we're going to start the meeting. My name's Gary Gillette. I organize this so you can blame me for everything. We got a great lineup of people here. We have three members of the Stearnes royalty family from Detroit.
Oh, thank
We have
you.
distinguished panelists who are going to talk about Turkey's career, analyze it. We have an expert on the Hall of Fame, Dan Diadana, who worked at the Hall of Fame when he was a mere tyke. I presume before he had that full beard, um, and is the best guy to explain what goes on in the Hall of Fame, even though he is now works in Holland, Michigan. Is that your hometown, Dan?
Ann Arbor originally, but I've been in Holland now for 20 years.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so thank you. This is a Turkey Stearnes Symposium. We're being held on the 25th anniversary of Turkey's induction to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. I should say belated, long overdue induction on July 23rd, 2000. We have at least three people here who were at that induction ceremony. Maybe we'll get one or two others, although I don't think we will. Um, and The meeting is sponsored by the Turkey Stearnes Foundation and by the SABR Southern Michigan chapter. We're using SABR's Zoom channel, which is reliable and solid, and I get tech support from Jacob Pomrenke, who always knows the answer to every question I ask him. Someday I'm going to try to stump him by asking him a question that nobody can answer. So the goal of this symposium or event is to memorialize the great Turkey Stearnes, because I feel that even though lots of scholarship in the last quarter century has elevated his status from a really good player that no one knows about, he's still not put at the level where he belongs. He's still sort of relegated to, well, there's Oscar Charleston, Josh Gibson, and Satchel Paige. And then there are a bunch of guys below him, Willie Wells, Cool Papa Bell, um, Buck Leonard, etc. And then there are a bunch of guys, other guys who are really good. And he's sort of in this big group of really good players, really great players, but I think he deserves to be moved up to one notch below the Gibson, Page, Charleston level. And in order to demonstrate that, I put together a great team. But before we go to the actual program, I want to introduce the family members here and give them a chance to say something personal for a few minutes. So I'm going to start with Joyce Stearnes Thompson. Joyce still here?
I
Joyce?
am. I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
I,
I can't see you for some reason. Don't worry about it. So Joyce is the president of the Turkey Stearnes Foundation. That's why she gets first billing. Joyce, you want to make some opening remarks?
okay, I had planned to use my 3 minutes to teach you some American Sign Language words about my dad. But something happened today to change my mind. So I'm going to tell you a story and why I changed my mind. My father loved children, but when the grandchildren were born, he had the time of his life. My daughter Karen was the firstborn, and he thought she was so cute and smart. And Karen shadowed him. She followed him everywhere he went. And she helped him push the stroller that had her twin brothers in it. And dad took them and Rosilyn's son, Tony, to the store. They went downtown on the bus. And my mom took Karen on all of her trips. I've been valet parking for months now at Carmano's because Karen has acute myeloid leukemia, and she had a stem cell transplant on June 1st. And she's had some serious side effects, and she's now in the ICU at Harper Hospital. Every day I wear Detroit Stars or Detroit Tigers jerseys, and the valet guy thought my jerseys were great, but they thought they were Detroit Tigers jerseys. And they didn't know anything about Turkey Stearnes. So before I leave every day, I always take time to teach them about Dad and the Negro Leagues. Karen is critically ill and on a ventilator. So when one of the young guys brought my car today, he wanted to know where he could get this jersey that I have on. And actually, this is the one from the Hall of Fame induction as my hat too. And I told him he can't buy this one, but tomorrow will let him know where to go. And then I remembered I had a Detroit Stars jersey from the giveaway last month with the Detroit Tigers with the 1919 on the back. And I told him 1919 was the year that the Detroit Stars were formed, and I would see him tomorrow. And he was so excited, and it warmed my heart to see how happy it made him. But I know now tomorrow when I go, they're all going to be running up to me to ask for a jersey. So as we celebrate Dad's 25th anniversary, I want you to remember I am going to teach you 6 words. And the first one, this is the A, awesome. So you can put your hands up to the sky. My dad was awesome. My dad was also brave. This is a B. And this is the sign for brave. Put from the shoulders you grab. My dad was brave. The letter E, exciting. My dad was exciting to watch with the Detroit Stars, the New York Lincoln Giants, the Kansas City Monarchs, the Chicago American Giants, and other Negro Leagues teams. This is a J. You take your fingers and make the letter J. Jesus. You remember the nails in his hand. Talk about a man who loved Jesus. That was my dad. And he was just as good as Josh Gibson. This is a P. And you take it, the sign for patient. Just do this across your lips one time. Patient. He was also peaceful. And my dad played for the love of the game, not the popularity or the money. And the final one, this is a Z. You just draw a Z in the sky with either hand. 0. That's the number of film footage available for the world to see him playing. I hope you enjoyed that. That was awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Joyce.
you.
And now I shall introduce Turkey's other daughter, Rosilyn Stearnes Brown, who we're fortunate to have with us. Rosilyn is the secretary and co-founder of the Turkey Stearnes Foundation. Rosilyn?
Hi, everybody. And I'm glad to see people here. And I like it that some of you have said that you didn't know anything about Dad. And I found that out when I'm a retired music teacher. And when I was teaching school, I found out when they get when they put on the plaque on the side of Comerica Park, I found out that the kids didn't know anything basically about baseball, and especially not Negro League baseball, because when they saw the plaque, one of my kids came up to me because our kids they were doing summer school, and one of the kids came up to me and said, Miss Brown, he said, you mean to tell me there were more black ball players playing baseball than Jackie Robinson? And I said, well, yeah. And I said, my dad was one of them. And they said, oh, you're famous. I said, no, Dad is. And so that taught me a lesson. You cannot assume that children know anything. And I think that's one of our initiatives with the foundation. And that was something Dad was always concerned about. He was concerned about education and family. So it's up to us to spread the word and to let people know that these were really fantastic ball players. And my main concern is that I want them to not only know that Dad was a great ball player, but he was a great man because he loved his family, he loved children, he loved doing things, he loved education, and he just was an all-around great man. And that's why I do what I do because of him. And my sister and I both are because of who we are, because Dad supported us in everything. We're both musicians. And Dad was always there. We could always count on him when you needed somebody to calm my nerves. If I looked in the audience and saw Dad, that helped me. And that's why we do what we're doing right now. So I want you to learn about him not only as a baseball player, but to also know that Dad was just a great man. And he was the type of man that I would want other men to follow and to be just like him. And I thank God that Dad was a part of my life for the 33 years that he lived with us.
Rosilyn, thank you. Thank you. It was very heartfelt. And I'm now going to introduce Vanessa Ivy Rose, who is being introduced last because she's the youngest. I could say the smartest and the prettiest, but I won't. No, that's just a joke. But Vanessa is
Okay.
going to talk about herself and whatever she wants. Take it away.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you all for being here. I recognize some of the names, and that makes me really happy. It makes me even happier to see new names and faces that I haven't been introduced to yet. And so you being here to celebrate my grandfather is definitely an honor. I'm so grateful for that. I'm also grateful that you're here to celebrate, as you'll find out, my grandmother, Grandma Nettie. I wouldn't know what I know about my grandfather if it weren't, for the many years of her teaching me, showing me, and sitting there with me watching Tigers games. So I want to make sure that, today is definitely about my grandfather, but just as much about my grandmother. And I think you'll make that, you'll understand that as you get towards the end of the program. So I wrote a little something just to stay on track with time too. And because writers write, of course. I said, thank you all for being here to honor my grandfather and my grandmother as well. I know they would be honored and filled with gratitude that 25 years after the induction, that you all would still want to revisit that time, to make connections to the present, and to think deeply about why this matters for baseball, but beyond the game as well. Every single day I wake up and go to sleep thinking about my grandparents, and it's been like that for at least the past 20 years. Why? Not just because I miss them, but because they've helped me see that Black excellence is my birthright. For example, when MLB The Show recognized Grandpa in their video game, I had to show my students. One of my students who doesn't watch baseball at all said, "Mrs. Rose, that's you." Caught off guard, I said, "What do you mean that's me?" She said, "When people today talk about your grandpa, it's because you kept it going with all the hard work you've done. That's you. It's from the universe." It was a light bulb moment for me to realize the part I played in continuing and protecting the legacy, especially since the 2000 induction, and all the alignment that has had to happen to introduce me to people who have dedicated themselves to this work for decades. Men like Ron Schoolboy Teasley, who has answered questions I never had the chance to ask Grandpa directly because he passed away before I was born. And who has also told me firsthand what my grandfather was like as a player and as a person. To the producers, journalists, historians, news outlets, and media personalities who recognize my gift for writing and my love for my grandparents' legacy, that have provided a platform for me to share out to national and global audiences. To the strangers who have become supporters and who have unknowingly provided encouragement, love, and support on days when it was a little bit harder to see the sun than usual. So I would echo the words of my student to you all as well. Yes, it's me, but it's also all of us. The people who actively pull up a chair to the table of baseball, the Negro Leagues, to love, truth, respect, diversity, and inclusion. Those of you with open minds and open hearts to the stories of Turkey and the men and women of the Negro Leagues. To those of you who have been committed to making sure Turkey remains visible. All of us are the reason Turkey's bat still talks, and Nettie's prayers, turned to reality, have blossomed into one dream after another being fulfilled. So again, thank you all for being here and for the continued love you have shown. It means more than you know. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Nice. I'm going to introduce Dan Diodon. I've already sucked up to him by telling everyone he's the smartest and bestest analyst about the Hall of Fame there is out there. I mean, Jay Jaffe, I'd have to give Jay his props too. So Dan is at the top of the pyramid with Jay. But Dan, I asked him to explain the Hall of Fame elections because there's going to be some discussion of why it took till 2000 to put Turkey Stearnes in the Hall of Fame if he's as good as we're going to say he is. So Dan is the sports editor of the Holland Sentinel, an all-around good guy, a journalist, a SABR member, a father, a baseball historian. Take it away, Dan.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. And thanks to the Stearnes family for joining us again. And Joyce, nice work on the sign language. Appreciate that. That's always fun. So first of all, yes, Gary, I was at the 2000 induction. That was my second.
Oh, great.
my second one of many. It was a great day. That's kind of how I learned about Turkey Stearnes in the first place. When all that started to happen, I was 19, and I was that really got me into the Negro Leagues because we went there for Sparky, and we got Turkey, and it was great, and that was you're really pivotal for both my dad and I, and my dad's part of this group too. Um, so I'm gonna be as brief as I can with the Hall of Fame, history of the elections and everything. Um, First of all, 1936 was the first year there was a ballot. Players were voted on by the writers, and there was some form of a veterans committee. It had many names. It was the Pioneers Committee at one point, the Veterans Committee. Now it's the Eras Committee, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But it was, the writers mostly elected players, and players who fell off the writers' ballot ended up on some form of a Veterans Committee, which was, like I said, had very many different groups, but it ended up for a long time being a panel of about 15 former players, media members, and front office folks that got together and voted. So there were the first big step to having Negro League players elected to the Hall of Fame came in 1966 when Ted Williams mentioned them in his Hall of Fame speech. He never told anybody he was going to mention them. He didn't make a big deal out of it beforehand, but he just said, I hope that there's some way the Hall of Fame can honor players like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige, and players who weren't given a chance. That's it. That's all he said. But it really lit a fire and started this movement. And it took somebody like Ted Williams to really get it going, because the media had been talking about it for years and years. And that they finally listened to Ted Williams. They announced they'd be holding special Negro Leagues elections starting in 1971 when they they elected Satchel Paige. At first, they were told it was going to be a separate wing, and there was, as you can imagine, a huge just PR nightmare for the Hall of Fame and for Commissioner Bowie Kuhn. And Satchel himself said, "I'm not going in the back door of the Hall of Fame. It's the front door or nothing." And they finally got it right, and that's how they. And then Satchel Paige was elected that year, a full member of the Hall of Fame, front door, however you want to call it. But then they were going to go around the diamond and have one player from each position that was elected. So starting in 1971, the Hall of Fame, the committee, the Special Negro Leagues Committee, elected Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard the next year, and then Monty Irvin, Oscar Charleston, Cool Papa Bell, Pop Lloyd, Martine DeHigo, and Judy Johnson, giving us one player at every position, counting Martine DeHigo as the second baseman, since he played all the positions. So that the Hall of Fame's plan was to stop there, and that was going to be enough of a representation. And of course, as we know, that's in hindsight very ridiculous, not even just misguided. But there was a big movement, especially by Buck O'Neill, to get Rube Foster in the Hall of Fame as the driving force that founded the Negro Leagues, and he was elected by the Veterans Committee in 1981, as the Hall of Fame decided that Negro League players and executives would be allowed to be considered in the Veterans Committee elections as everyone else was. And in 1987, Ray Dandridge was elected. He remains the only Negro Leagues player that was ever elected by a non-specific Negro Leagues committee. So between 1981 and 1995, he was the only one. Ray Dandridge was the only player that was elected through that group, as plenty of white players were elected. Not saying undeservedly, but obviously that's not um, where the line of Negro Leagues legends ended. So when they to close the century, the Hall of Fame actually planned to add 6 Negro League players and 6 players from the 1800s, places they thought were underrepresented in the hall, and they had specific committees among the Veterans Committee to make sure one from each was elected. So there was one and only one each year for 6 years. Um, and that got Leon Day, Willie Foster, Willie Wells, Bullet Rogan, Smokey Joe Williams, and finally Turkey Stearnes into the Hall of Fame. They extended it 1 year for the Negro Leagues to elect Hilton Smith the following year, at the urge of Buck and others that can't be where the line is drawn. If Hilton Smith is out, then that's not where the line can be drawn. I'm not really sure how they organizationally got that going and how that came about specifically, but I know obviously Buck was pushing for that, and he was pushing for more and more as always. But they were able to do that and extend that 1 year. And then again, the Hall of Fame's plan was that was going to be it. And again, there was an uproar about that because we keep learning more and more. That's again not where the story should end or where the line's drawn. They decided to have a special one-time Negro Leagues committee in 2006, and the group elected stunningly 17 players and front office people from the Negro Leagues: Pete Hill, Saul White, Frank Grant, and Jose Mendez, who were more pre Negro Leagues stars, but also once the league got going, Mule Suttles, Biz Mackey, Judd Wilson, Cristobal Torriente, Ray Brown, Willard Brown, Andy Cooper, Ben Taylor, Luis Santop, and then owners Effa Manley, J.L. Wilkinson, Alex Pompez, and Cumberland Posey. Let me take a breath. That was all one election. And again, that was supposed to be it. It was supposed to get everybody in that needed to get in. But as we know, Buck O'Neil did not get in, and Minnie Minoso did not get in. And there was a huge uproar about that because by this time, so many baseball fans knew Buck and knew what he stood for, knew his history, even if they didn't know, say, the history of Cannonball Dick Redding, who is not yet in the Hall of Fame, but deserves to be there. So there was more push for that. And eventually, again, the Hall of Fame relented. And, they had added Negro League players back to this eras committee that they started after the Veterans Committee voted in like nobody for like a 12-year period. Or sorry, maybe Ron Santo was the only one in like 12 to 15-year period. So they moved to that, and the problem was the era is like 100 years old. Like it's like from the beginning of baseball. Now it's from the beginning of baseball to 1980. So Cannonball Dick Redding and Rap Dixon will be on the era committee with Thurman Munson. And they just were on it with Dave Parker. So Buck O'Neil, obviously with the huge following, he got in 2022, along with Bud Fowler, who was the first major Black professional in the 1800s. And again, now we're at a place where it's going to be very difficult. They cut 3 eras down to 2. And last year, Dick Allen and Dave Parker were both deserving candidates, were voted into through that era. But it's a system that will continue to make it difficult for the likes of especially managers, Vic Harris, and players like Cannonball Dick Redding, John Donaldson, Rap Dixon, among many others, because we're now talking all the way to 1980 from the beginning of baseball. So you'll have players from the 1800s on this ballot, and you'll have Negro League players on this ballot. You'll have players like Sherry McGee from the 30s Phillies that'll be on this ballot. You'll have Ken Boyer on this ballot. You'll have Thurman Munson on this ballot. Louis Tion on this ballot. It's just there's no possible way to get it down to 8 or 10 finalists that's not going to leave out, in my opinion, several players that deserve to make it, not let alone be on the ballot. So that's the history of where we are. It keeps the Hall of Fame keeps in my opinion, making bad PR moves by, stopping and wanting this to be done, and then finally relenting when the pressure gets going. I don't know why they can't just have something that stays pat and is. Hopefully, this will be at least they'll all Negro League players will always be allowed to be on this ERA's committee, even if it's the ERA itself gets harder and bigger to elect. But that's where we are now, and we'll hopefully in a few years I'll be able to say, and then this is how Cannonball Dick Redding got in.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the history, and people can see how many changes there has been in the Hall of Fame's election procedures and how they've jiggered the rules to make it easier or harder for Negro Leaguers to get in compared to white players from before World War II or the segregated era, which they don't like to say. I hope you all enjoyed Nettie's speech. I found it very touching. And Ron's video. I also want to say that, of course, Nettie name-checked Joe Lapointe, who will be with us here on the panel. And she also name-checked Mike Ranville, who, along with his colleague Jim Curran, did a grassroots campaign to help Turkey Stearnes get elected in the late 90s. Unfortunately, Mike passed away last weekend. I just saw him at Comerica Park a month ago at the Tigers Negro Leagues game. And unfortunately, he is no longer with us. I want to give him a shout out and thank him and his colleague Jim Curran for helping the family prosecute the Hall of Fame to put Turkey Stearnes in. At this point, I'm going to introduce Clem Hamilton, who is one of our panelists. And the reason I'm introducing Clem first is because he has a presentation about his statistical analysis of Turkey Stearnes and where he ranks in the pantheon of both Negro Leaguers and American League and National League ball players. Clem is a retired botanist and horticulturalist in St. Louis, recently became a Negro League scholar. I met him in Birmingham in 2022 when he did a spectacularly good presentation. And I'm proud to say that he has agreed to join us today. Clem?
All right.
Please.
Thank you. Can you all hear me all right? Good. Okay. So before I launch into things, I would like to add to something that you said, Dan. You said that the Hall of Fame was guilty of bad PR moves. I would add guilty of bad analytical moves too, which I'm sure you would agree with. As part of my study that I started about 3 years ago to begin evaluating the careers of Hall of Fame black ball players and also players who had been considered at one time or another to be strong candidates. One conclusion that I reached that I will add in addition to my script here is that to achieve racial parity in the Hall of Fame, we need to at least double the number of black ball players in it. It's not just adding 2 or 3 or 4 more. So Dan, as you described the process, we ain't going to get there. So we need to be thinking seriously about that. But the most important conclusion I will reach in this little presentation concerns Turkey Stearnes, and we can sum it up in 2 words, and that is holy moly. I mean, when I started doing this analysis, I didn't have any preconceptions about who was going to be undervalued, overvalued, anything else. But as you will see, my goodness, and Gary, you mentioned at the outset where he should stand, which is a whole lot higher than even many of us who have been big fans for a number of years would have thought. So in this presentation, I'm going to take it in 3 parts. One is a summary and highlights of his 18-year Negro Major League career. And then second, we'll compare his career to that of other top segregation era black outfielders. And finally, we will bring in all center fielders, black and white, segregated era, integrated era, up until the present day, and we'll see where he stands in all these comparisons. First, a note about methodology. Something that I do that's different, and I think is well justified, or else I wouldn't be here, is that if you look at seam heads or baseball reference and look at the statistical lines, of course you observe that they're based each season will have a different number of games played. So you're left trying to evaluate one season where the team plays 95 games and then another season where the team that he played for 60 games. Well, then you add all those numbers up at the bottom and try to make some draw some conclusion about his career. Well, there's a fallacy there because in effect you are weighting some seasons over the others. And so the solution is to normalize all of those seasons so you can regard them equally. And as long as you're normalizing it, why not normalize it to a hypothetical 154 game season so that then you can compare it to contemporary white ball players? So for instance, in 1926, Detroit played 95 games. He played 93 of them. And just mention a couple of the stats. He hit 9 triples, 21 home runs, and he had a 5.9 WAR for that season. Now, if you scale that up to 154 game season, you're multiplying those numbers by 154 over 95. And so the result with those particular stats is a hypothetical season. I hate saying the word hypothetical, scaled up, that's better, of 15 triples, 34 home runs, and an 8.2 WAR. So you do that with all of the years, and I think in that case you get a much more accurate view of a person's career. So then when we move on to comparing him to other players, we will also use the WAR numbers scaled up for each season and added up, and we will the way we'll tackle that is to use not only the career accumulation, all of the WAR accumulated over his entire career, but also the 7 peak seasons. Because there's always the argument for the Hall of Fame is what's more important? Is it the career accumulation, see Cott, comma Jim, or is it the short peak period in which you're talking about Dizzy Dean or Sandy Koufax or something else like that? And Gary, you mentioned Jay Jaffe. I'm a big fan of his solution to that, which is using JAWS, which is JAWS, which is averaging those two numbers. So you get an index that reflects both career accumulation and peak performance as well. Okay, let's get into the results here. So his career highlights. So 18-year career, 1923 through 1940. His slash line, batting average, this is, taking care of getting rid of all this, the sample size bias, as I described. Batting average of 342, on base 411, slug 599, and here's the kicker. Adjusted OPS, which is written OPS plus for you stat geeks, of 170. Now, this is normalized so that 100 represents league average. So what that tells us is he was 70% better than the league average over his entire career. So other legends to compare, Babe Ruth was 206, Lou Gehrig 179, Ty Cobb 168, Stan Musial 159. You're in some real heady company there. Stearnes had only one mediocre season, 1938, his third one from the end. His adjusted OPS was 117, but then he finished strong in 39 and 40 at the ages of 38 and 39. So his average 154 game season over his career looked like this: 148 games played, very durable, 136 runs scored, 194 hits, 33 doubles, 17 triples, 26 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and 141 runs batted in. So we have a sense of what a good season looks like, and obviously that compares very favorably. Over his entire career, his scaled up incarnation, let's use that phrase, that's fun, would have him at 3,484 hits, 302 triples, 472 home runs, 353 stolen bases, and 2,536 RBIs. On today's home run list, his 472 would fall between Carlos Delgado and Chipper Jones, to which you're saying, okay, well, big deal. But when he retired, he being Stearnes, not Chipper Jones, when he retired after 1940, he would have been behind, among white hitters, only Babe Ruth, Jimmy Fox, Lou Gehrig, and Mel Ott was at 390 on his way to 511. Now, Stearnes scaled up triples total of 302. Where does that stand on the all-time leaderboard? Well, the all-time leader in triples is the great Detroit Tiger, Sam Crawford, with 309. So he was a triples machine. Well, both Crawford and Stearns. So that was a bit of a surprise to me. So in short, Stearns showed a remarkable blend of power and speed, the power of Melott, and the speed and base running skill of Sam Crawford. One might also compare him to my man Stan Musial, being a St. Louisan, who finished with 475 home runs and 177 triples. In his early years, Stan led the National League in triples 5 times, but after 1951, he decided it wasn't worth the wear on his knees, and so he'd pull up at second base instead. But Stearns kept running until the end. 12 triples and 15 stolen bases, scaled up, at the age of 39. That is impressive. Okay, part two. Comparing him to other black ball outfielders. So this is where we're going to use that Jaws thing. So when we look at black ball outfielders, Oscar Charleston sits clearly at number 1. And I won't bore you with the numbers, but, well, I will with one. His Jaws is an otherworldly 121.0. So then the next 3 I consider effectively tied are Pete Hill. His number is 106.1, which is likely overvalued in the dead ball area. We don't have time to go into that. Cristobal Torriente at 98.7, not counting his pitching productivity, and Stearns at 96.1. I don't get excited about differentiating between small differences like that, but that tells you where he is. He is very squarely in that next tier below only Oscar Charleston. Then the top 5 is rounded out with Willard Brown, and put it into further context, there's a gap before the next tier that has 3 guys, Cool Papa Bell, 57.7. By the way, Cool Papa, and I'm a big fan of him. I visit his gravesite at least once a year. He was an accumulator. His peak was only 34.8, but his career was 80.6, and so he's right there. Now, 2 others you might not expect, Alejandro Ohms and Hurley McNair. So Bell is in the hall, and I regard Ohms and McNair as deserving locks. So then the next tier of outfielders is a tightly clustered list of 11, topped by Rap Dixon and Ted Strong, whom I also consider easy hall selections. And I would be saying this even if Ted weren't on the call here. Hi, Ted. All right. So in sum, the only black ball outfielder who stands clearly above Stearns is Oscar Charleston, who is regarded by many as black ball's all-time greatest player. Final section, Stearns compared to all center fielders, white and black. So that brings some serious household name legends into the discussion. Again, using Jaws to order the contenders, we have a top trio of Charleston, Willie Mays, and Ty Cobb. And then there's the second tier. We already talked about Pete Hill, Torriente, and Stearns. Among the white players, we just add Tris Speaker. And then after another gap, we pick up Mickey Mantle, Mike Trout, Willard Brown, Ken Griffey Jr., and Joe DiMaggio. So Turkey Stearnes' placement with Speaker, Hill, and Torriente behind only Charleston, Mays, and Cobb, and well above the likes of Mantle and DiMaggio, is a striking result, one that I did not expect. As I said at the outset, I knew he was good, but wow. So today, we celebrate the career of one of the most accomplished players in baseball history. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Clem. If you are having trouble keeping up with Clem, go to baseballreference.com, where they have really excellent explanations of WAR and OPS and OPS plus. And you can watch this record video on YouTube afterward, although it will be a few days before it gets there, which would allow you to pause it and look up things if you want to try to absorb all the information Clem gave us. So now I'm going to introduce the rest of our panel. We've already introduced and met Vanessa Ivy Rose and Clem Hamilton. The other 3 panelists are Joe Lapointe, who we mentioned. Joe was a longtime journalist, started in Detroit with the Free Press, went to the New York Times, the August New York Times, and covered baseball and hockey. Taught journalism after he retired and came back to Detroit. And I don't know what else to say. It's a pretty impressive resume. Joe is going to talk about, hopefully, about how the mainstream media and the big media titans in New York, like the New York Times, viewed the Hall of Fame elections for Negro Leaguers, I hope. Anyway, we also have Mike Tiger Price. Mike is, I'm proud to say, a friend of mine and a neighbor. He is an expert on Detroit sports, particularly Detroit high school sports, but virtually anything about Detroit sports, Mike knows. And he is going to talk about the meaning and the significance of the Negro Leaguers to the Black community in Detroit. Of course, they can express other opinions. That's just the one thing. And then last but not least is Phil Dixon from Kansas City. Phil is, for my money, the preeminent Negro League scholar in the country. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a musician, he's a good guy. That doesn't come last, but I am grateful and humbled to have Phil Dixon with us and hope he'll comment a little bit on Turkey's time at the end of his career with the Monarchs, since we in Detroit don't know too much about that. Thanks. So I'm going to open it up to the panel and say that the panelists can take it away.
Well, who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead, because I
right.
got to you last.
Well, I would like to say the first time I was introduced to Turkey Stearnes was in 1980. And at that time, Dink Maltho, who played for the Kansas City Monarchs, he actually died that year. Mr. Maltho, when he died, he left me about 30 photographs. And that was the beginning of me really getting into the Negro Leagues. I just knew about baseball in general before then. And actually maybe about 2 or 3 of those photographs were of Turkey Stearnes, who was his good friend. Fast forward, years later, I came across Bullet Rogan's son. And as I was interviewing him, he showed me a copy of Bullet Rogan's old phone book. This is personal phone book. He had names in it. Of course, Turkey's in there as well. But through the years, I had begun to learn a lot about Turkey. And, they talk about how many home runs Turkey hit. But I tell you, he hit more home runs than they're telling you about. And if you ever follow my history, I have a series of books called Phil Dixon American Baseball Chronicles, where I take the entire season. I don't separate the Negro League games from the town teams they play. What I do is I take their entire season and tell you the story as it really happened. Not a story that's fractioned up to make a statistical story. So I tell you the story that has really happened. So that's the way my research has gone. So I could think about a few things about Turkey that he did that don't show up in these statistics. And one of them, 1927, out in Bakersfield, California. Turkey had a home run there. They're playing out in the California Winter League, and all the home runs he hit out there, none of that is in those statistics that you're looking at. In 1923, he was playing with a team called the St. Louis Colored Giants, and they were working their way toward California. They stopped off in Denver. He had 3 home runs there. That's not counted in anything you see. This man was far greater than what you're getting, and you're getting a lot. But this man was really good. And then if you come down to his final years, and I like to say that Turkey was a Western ball player. When I say Western, when you join the Kansas City Monarchs, you're going to be playing places like Oklahoma City. You're going to be playing in Omaha, Nebraska. You're going to be in South Dakota, North Dakota. You're going to be down in Iowa. And not playing against league teams, but you're playing every single night. And so Turkey Stearnes with the Monarchs, they came in 1938. And of course, he started the season with the American Giants. And he had actually hit 2 home runs in a game against the Monarchs prior to him joining. And that was down in Texas somewhere. So anyway, he signs up. And the interesting thing is he's one of the best players in the league, but he doesn't appear in the East-West game. And so the Monarchs continued to play, even though the East-West game was being played. So Turkey was with the Kansas City Monarchs. They're playing in Topeka, Kansas. He's in Topeka, Kansas, while they're playing the East-West game. And the Monarchs had about 6 or 7 players there, but he's in Topeka because they still have to play a game. So some of the history is kind of skewed. And when you think about how great this guy is, when you start to add all this other information and understand the story, you just know so much more. But anyway, in 1938, they say he had 2 home runs. And then it said 1939, they say 7. Then they had 5 home runs for 1940. Guys, I'm going to tell you, don't believe it at all. This guy was batting 3rd. And of course, Rainey Bibbs batted 2nd. He's in the Indiana Sports Hall of Fame, went to Indiana U, and he's batted second. And right behind Turkey Stearnes was another Hall of Famer, Willard Brown, batting behind him. And Turkey was still a premier hitter. And so this is just a ball player that needs to be celebrated. And I will go back. The first time he joined the Kansas City Monarchs was in 1931. He came on at the end of the season and went to Mexico with them. The next time he plays with the Kansas City Monarchs is in 1934. He goes to the Denver Post Tournament and is a member of the Kansas City Monarchs in the Denver Post Tournament in 34. He is the MVP of the tournament. These are some of your best, the semi-professional teams from all over the country. Of course, the House of David won that tournament. And so everything that we know about Turkey says greatness. He's stamped with greatness, and we are still learning more. And I always want to tell the complete story about Turkey. And so there's so much that I could say about this guy. He was just a great hitter. Always a pleasure to talk about. You know, when I think about these guys in the Hall of Fame, I know that not only does he deserve to be there, but some of his teammates that are not there also, who he thought were great players. So that's kind of my wrap on Turkey Stearnes. And every place I go, I get a chance to talk about Turkey because I talk about the uniqueness of nicknames in my presentation. So I've been introducing people to Turkey Stearnes all over the country for years. And so we're still trying to enlarge this man's image because he certainly deserves it. That's my tale, and I'm holding to it.
Thank you, Phil. I learned a lot from that. I'm going to give the mic to Mike Price here, so he has a chance to say something. Mike, you're muted, Mike. You have to unmute.
I've always believed that information is power. And learning about Mr. Stearnes in the 1960s as a former Negro Leaguer in the game of baseball that I love so much was important history to me and my friends. We learned as boys that Turkey Stearnes would often sit in the Tiger Stadium bleachers, as many of us young people did. And this, of course, made me want to meet Mr. Stearnes. Unfortunately, I've only met him through his wonderful family, which is good enough for me. Knowing more about the Hall of Fame found Turkey Stearnes and the Detroit Stars for baseball fans would have increased our awareness and pride. My dad used to say about the Detroit Tigers, they don't play baseball, they play raceball. Finding the Turkey Stearnes plaque in center field outside of a 7-year-old Comerica Park beginning in 2007 was exciting, but sad. Mr. Stearnes was an all-time baseball great that was never allowed to play at Briggs or Tiger Stadium due to Spike Briggs Sr.'s edict that a black man would never play on his ball field. For us, the MLB did not exist on television except when the National League played. While Briggs Sr. was owner from 35 to 1952, we only saw semi-professional, sandlot, and high school baseball in Detroit because black people did not play on Detroit teams, on Tiger teams. Then in the minor league Rule 5 draft of 1957, the Tigers selected Maury Wills, who clearly outplayed Tiger shortstop Reno Bertoia defensively and at bat, bunting for quality hits. But the Tigers would not make a place for Maury Wills, but the LA Dodgers sure did, and they won 4 championships, 1959 and in the 60s, with stellar pitching, timely clutch hitting, speed, defense, and hungry for game-winning black ball players were the difference between a city of pride or losing because of a team's impudence and prejudice. Growing up in segregated Detroit, our neighbors were teachers, doctors, pastors, and the Detroiters the same. The West Siders, Wally Triplett, Lem Barney, Motown singers like Marvin Gaye, Pistons Ray Scott, Dave Dean, Jake Wood, Billy Brooks, Gates Brown, Willie Horton, and Earl Wilson. The Detroit Tigers, as everyone now knows, signed no black players until Briggs died in 1952, and his son Walter succeeded him. However, they waited until June 6, 1958 to sign third baseman Ozzie Virgil, who was the first international black player to play for the Tigers. So from 1951 to 1960, years that I was a boy, Detroit never finished better than 17 games out of first place. And then finally, Briggs sold the team in 1960. Thank you. I'll be ready a little bit later for any more questions.
Thanks very much, Mike. We appreciate that perspective. I see you're getting kudos. And now I'm going to ask Joe Lapointe to take the mic for a second. Joe has a unique perspective, except now, of course, I don't know everybody who's in the Zoom here, but except for Dan Diadonna, someone who's been a professional journalist, and Joe has been at the Apex in New York. Joe? You're mute. Yeah, good.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I've enjoyed all these speeches before me. Mr. Price, especially, you were talking about Ozzie Virgil breaking the Tigers' color line. I spoke to him when he was a coach for Montreal, and he said in a very graceful, gracious way, "I wasn't the first black Detroit Tiger. I'm a Dominican from New York." He said he has nothing against black people, but Larry Doby was the first black Tiger, and Billy Bruton and Jake Wood were the first black Tiger starters. And it's all part of the history gets confused. People think Ozzie Virgil was black. He never was, but he was. He did break the color barrier. I also wanted to mention something to Dan Diadonna about the Hall of Fame. You could do research, I know, about how guys get in. Did Ernie Harwell have much influence on Turkey Stearnes? Harwell was on the Veterans Committee that year, and that's the year Turkey went in. There must be a connection.
Yes, I actually talked to Ernie about that a couple years after. Yeah, he was definitely vocal about Turkey Stearnes. Everybody kind of assumed that he was there to give some anecdotal stuff about Sparky Anderson, who was up for the first time, and yeah, he had a lot to say about Turkey as well.
Harwell never gets credit for it, and he was the kind of guy who didn't seek glory. But I think his awareness of Detroit and the campaign that was going on with postcards, I think that probably pushed it over the line, and Ernie deserves a little credit. Now I know I was asked to speak about what the media can do for awareness of Negro League ball and Turkey Stearnes. I am afraid about this because there aren't as many media outlets as there used to be. They're not as well staffed. And you got to remember, Negro League baseball disappeared pretty much 70, 75 years ago. There aren't a lot of people alive who saw it. As someone mentioned earlier, there's not much film. And you just wish that someday someone in a vault would find a whole game so we could see Turkey Stearnes field the ball and run the bases. They said his arms flapped and so on and so forth. It's a little wishful thinking on my part. I'm not going to take much of your time, but it's important we keep the fire burning and the history alive. Did anyone read the 1619 Project in the New York Times about African American history in the United States? It was so important. Part of reparations, the word comes from repair. It's not just handing money to people. It's repairing history, telling the history of this is what African Americans went through. This is why things are the way they are. Now we've got baseball to use as our example. You can tell the story of American race history through baseball. You can tell it pretty well. And it's not been that long. It's 75 years since we've integrated. That's all I have to say for the moment. I'll take questions later.
Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate it. And Vanessa, do you want to say something since you haven't had a chance to say since we started the panel?
Yeah, and Mr. Lapointe, thank you for what you always share. You're right on top of things, and the educator in me, of course, appreciates what you mentioned about the 1619 project and how important that is. Hopefully, schools are making that a part of their curriculum. But like you said, baseball can teach us so much about history, and if we dive into the story of all of the players, not just the white players, obviously we'll start to understand some of the things that are happening right now and start taking some collective action towards creating positive change that will be sustainable for the future. So thank you for saying that. That really touched my heart that you said that before I had the opportunity to speak. Um, thinking back to the year 2000 and just being reflective about that today, I was 16. So I'm hearing the announcement about Grandpa going into the Hall of Fame literally while I'm taking driver's training. And that's something that I'll always remember because it's a pretty unique experience. And, that was the first time I was hearing on the radio or in mainstream media or, we watched a lot of TV back then, of course, watched a lot of movies. I read Sports Illustrated, watched ESPN. I was not hearing my grandfather's name. All right. So I was hearing Sparky Anderson. So of course I was excited when I heard that he was also going in with him. But I was more familiar with pretty much everybody who's ever played any sport, not just baseball, than I was with my grandfather when I'm speaking of what I'm seeing on TV, what I'm reading in a newspaper, what I'm reading in a magazine, what I'm being taught at school. Right. So thankfully, my grandmother was a teacher and, passed this history down to me and made sure that I knew about it. And she passed it on to everyone that she knew. She passed it on to Chris Webber, who was in the NBA Hall of Fame. And he mentioned it. If you haven't seen his speech, he dedicated 4.5 minutes to talking about my grandmother and Turkey Stearnes and their legacy, right? How it sparked his love for history, how it helped him to understand his purpose before he even was interested in sports, right? So that's just who my grandmother was. And I was blessed to have her in my life for so long, teaching me these things and making me aware of who I was, where, how history has shaped us, how history is trapped within us too, and that we have a unique responsibility to do something positive as we continue, no matter if we're invested in sports or not. So thinking back to being 16 and having the privilege and honor to travel to Cooperstown with my family, I knew it was a big deal, of course. But when I got there, I was seeing and experiencing and feeling so many things that only now I would be able to contextualize. So, being met with the opportunity of understanding how the walls and the space and the grass and the plaques of Cooperstown tell a story of the past, but also of the present and the future. How it tells us who's important and who's not important in terms of looking at our mainstream society, right? Whose stories have been told and celebrated, who's been left out. When we were at Cooperstown and I was learning about other players that maybe I wasn't as familiar with, like I said, I was familiar with Sparky Anderson, but how much did I really know about Bid McPhee? Never heard of him, right? Until my grandfather was on, a part of that same 2000 class. And so I remember feeling sad. I remember feeling that there was a distinction between the players of the past who are not there to speak for themselves and the players who actually were there to receive their flowers and people could see the footage of them playing, as Mr. Lapointe mentioned, right? Like not being able to see Turkey blast the ball 470 feet does make a difference in the mind of a young person or sports enthusiast or someone just learning about the game, right? And so having that visual representation that we don't have, it does impact the legacy. The other thing I was very concerned about is I was a little nervous for Grandma Nettie to get up there and speak because I knew how big this stage was in the world of sports. You didn't have to go to Cooperstown to know that. But what my 16-year-old self didn't know is that I didn't need to be nervous about Grandma Nettie speaking. As you all saw in the beginning of her speech, right? She got up there and freestyled it and made the entire audience laugh by quoting Tony the Tiger. Who does that? Right? Only my grandmother would do that because of her sense of humor, because of her charm, because she was deeply prophetic, and she knew that this day would come, and she was prepared for the moment. She wrote letters for 21 years for Grandpa Turkey to get into the Hall of Fame, to keep his name alive, as you mentioned, with people like Ernie Harwell, so that she could continue that advocacy. And she didn't have to do that. She chose to do it, and she did it because it was the right thing to do. Not just because Turkey was her husband, not just because she loved baseball, which she did. She would be so pumped about the Tigers right now. We could talk about that the whole rest of the time, of how excited she would be for our hometown team, right? But she did it because it was the right thing to do, and she prayed for it, and she manifested it, and she affirmed it. She lived it. These weren't just stats to her. These weren't just stories to her, right? This is the story of not just Turkey Stearnes, but and looking at, like I said, Nettie Stearnes and her journey, a woman from the deep South, Alabama, who lived through the horrors of Jim Crow, who made that northern migration to Detroit, became an educator, and educated people with love and respect, and helped them follow their dreams, whether it was related to baseball or not. So when she was affirming Grandpa's greatness and speaking the truth, of course she was preparing herself for this moment where she could stand up on a stage where, by the way, there were not many women up there on the stage. And when I was looking at trying to pull up how many women have given an induction speech at Cooperstown, Grandma may have been one of the first, if not the first, right, in the year 2000. So, the fact that she was prepared for that moment, that she had that type of confidence, and that she, could see the light in other people and was very focused on helping people understand how to make a positive impact in society while talking about baseball. I think that's a huge part of Grandpa Turkey's legacy. A big reason why I'm here talking to you all today. And I'm just so proud to be a part of this experience. And thinking back 25 years, like I said, hopefully moving forward, yes, we do have, and I know someone also mentioned it in the chat, we have MLB The Show. We have, documentaries that are being made now. We obviously have people who are talking about Turkey Stearnes and Cool Papa Bell and Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. But at the same time, when I go to Comerica Park, and within the past few years, people are saying like Turkey who, or who's Turkey Stearnes, or the Negro Leagues, or the Detroit Stars with a question mark, or within the past decade, when someone walks up to me and says, Turkey Stearnes, what's a Turkey Stearnes? As I ask other people when I do book talks and speak about Grandpa, hey, would anyone say, what's a Babe Ruth? What's a Ty Cobb? Even if you're not a baseball fan, you're familiar with the names. Grandpa's in the top 10 of 3 different MLB all-time categories on the list with all the biggest names in baseball. And still there's a layer of invisibility, right? So it's really important for everybody here to continue to praise him, to talk about what he did, and not just what he did, what all the Negro Leaguers did, the men and women who came before us. We stand on their shoulders. And that's definitely something I'm thinking about today when I reflect and smile thinking about Grandpa Turkey going in the year 2000.
Thanks, Vanessa. Clem, you have something you want to say?
I do, to follow up on that point. So Gerald Early, who you may remember from the Ken Burns baseball series, prominently, especially talking about integration, he has just come up with a new book. I hope you can see it, called Play Harder. The subtitle is The Triumph of Black Baseball in America. Last night, he gave a talk at the main branch of the St. Louis County Public Library, and about 200 people showed up. And one person, after his talk, asked the question, who are the black ball players who we haven't heard of, or rather, who deserve more recognition? And I piped up before Gerald could get a word in edgewise and said, well, here's an example for you, Turkey Stearnes. Now, there were 200 people in that audience, and what I was facing when I said that was 200 absolutely 100 blank expressions. And these were the people who cared enough about the subject to come to a discussion of this book. So I mean, we're gathered here, we're the true believers, but we've got to get beyond that.
I'd like to say something too. You know the story about Buck O'Neill and him getting these guys into the Hall of Fame? The interesting thing about that is that with the first group of people they put in the Hall of Fame, with probably the lone exception of Satchel Paige, who played both in the East and the West, there were no guys from the West. And so when Buck O'Neill became a part of this Hall of Fame committee, there were people like myself and Larry Lester feeding him the information. Buck was not a researcher. He needed support. And so we began to feed him the names of the Western guys, and which he knew the ones he played with. But he didn't really play with Rogan maybe 1 year, but he needed the information. So out of that whole movement came Turkey Stearnes, came Bullet Rogan, came Hilton Smith, came Willard Brown. There was a whole movement. And I think sometimes if you just look at who was in the Hall of Fame, there's all these Eastern ball players from the beginning, but the West came on heavy through Buck O'Neill. And I'm proud to be one of those guys that was behind the scene feeding him information, because he got the job done, because he was sitting right there and he fought hard and we fought hard giving him the information. So I just want to throw that in there. And that's one of the background stories of how we got Turkey moved to the front. But so much work to be done. You're correct.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I want to go break the panel discussion just for a couple minutes and ask Joyce and Rosilyn if they want to say something about Induction Day in Cooperstown. I know, Joyce, you've talked about your mother ad-libbing her speech because you had a prepared speech.
Well, yeah, the Hall of Fame notified us that the speech could only be 5 minutes. So Mom and I worked relentlessly on a 5-minute speech, and we wanted to be sure that she thanked everybody at the very end of her speech. Now, what happened as a result of when the speech was over, if you get the Hall of Fame, the VHS tape that they sent out, they cut and edited all the people that she thanked at the very end. So her speech on their tape is only like 3 minutes rather than the 5 minutes. And when we got there to the induction, Sparky Anderson, Carlton Fisk, especially Carlton Fisk, all the speeches were more than 40, 45 minutes. So we followed the rule. And so when Mom got up and freestyled her speech, I was not happy. And you saw her look to the side because I had jumped out of my seat. I didn't have a problem with her saying, I feel great, because that's how she felt, and that was fine. But then she wasn't really looking at the speech, and she was making some mistakes. And Mom always wanted to be the celebrity, and sometimes we got into a little argument because I said, Dad's a celebrity, but in her own right, in her mind, she was a celebrity. So it is what it is. But as a result, some of the things that she said, because her sentences were a little confusing, and on their tape, there's some blanks where it says doesn't know what she said. So I'm still proud of her. She was older, and it was her moment at that time, and she got caught up in the moment, and she did a phenomenal job anyway, but it just was her doing it freestyle. It changed what it should have been and what we had practiced on.
Thanks, Joyce. Rosilyn, do you want to chip in here, talk about Induction Day?
Is she still on?
You're muted, Rosilyn.
Yeah, I can't add anything other than what Joyce just said, except that it was very hot. And like she said, the speeches were way over, especially Carlton Fisk. I mean, he just took advantage of the situation. But I'm just glad Mom did what she did, and we didn't realize it, but we thought that she wasn't going to be able to go to some of the things that they were invited to were just for the inductees and their representative. We thought Mom was going to be by herself, but Sparky Anderson took her up under his wing, and you would have thought that they had been friends forever. And so, and he would actually come to the room and say, "Come on, Nettie, come with me." And that made her feel really good. And I was really proud of that. And I was glad to see that Sparky Anderson's a real human being, and he's a loving person. So I'll never forget how he treated my mom at the ceremony because that was a lot of fun for her. And we were glad that he did what he did. But it was really fun. And I was really happy that mom was able to see all of her work that she had put into that not go void because she had done that for over 20 years trying to get dad in the Hall of Fame. And then with Michael Ramfield and those guys helping out, that really came to fruition. And we're happy all of that happened. I just wish dad had been here to see all of this.
Thank you. Thank you. It is really a pleasure to have family members on this Zoom and to have people who were in Cooperstown. Dan Diodana put in the chat that Fisk's speech was last and he went way over in all caps. Yeah, that
Mhm.
is something that's hard to do, to follow the rules when people are breaking them.
Mhm.
But the Hall of Fame is not going to, stomp on stomp on people like Carlton Fisk, I guess, right? Dan, do they ever shut anybody down who was an actual Hall of Famer as opposed to somebody else, a family member?
I've never seen it. I mean, I've never seen it like they don't do the music like the Oscars. So um I don't know. Like, I always have wondered if Fisk's speech would have been shorter if he was first or second. But
Um,
since he was last, he just kept going and going. I feel like
And
Sparky's was
going and
Sparky's was
going.
sharp, and it was, I think Jim Cott told me that they're supposed to give the players 15 minutes, and that's what he got. Sparky's was like around 15 to 20, but it was hilarious. And Tony Perez's, I don't remember being very long. But it was Fisk's was they talk about it. The Hall of Famers even give him a hard time. Jim was telling me about how long his speech was
Thank you.
because it was like high 90 degrees too. Like it was
Oh, yeah.
we were getting toward the second full hour, almost done with 2 hours of the ceremony, and everybody's out there like Woodstock, and it's like almost 100 degrees.
Thank you. So I'm going to change up the run of show here a bit. Unless any panel member feels they haven't had a chance to say what they want, I'd like to go to questions now. It looks like we have a really good audience. I think we'll get some good questions. So does any panelist object to going early to the Q&A? Okay, good. I didn't think so. All right, folks. So if you have a question, please put up your virtual hand because then it'll pop to the top of my gallery here and I can pick you out easier than if you raise your hand like this. And we'll take questions from the audience. I'm sure looking at the chat, we'll have a few. So of course, now I don't see anybody. Is there somebody out there who I'm missing? Oh, okay, Peter Thompson. I couldn't believe it wasn't a question.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah,
Peter,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, question. Can you name, say, three good books to read about, black baseball, Negro League and everything? Maybe at least maybe three books be real well to read about that. Get the good background and history.
Well, there are plenty of good books. I'll let the panelists answer what they think are the best ones to recommend.
Well, I have, you might get my book. It's kind of hard to get because it's out of print, but you can pick it up. The Negro Baseball Leagues: A Photographic History.
Yeah. That is that. I'm just sorry, Phil, breaking in. That is the best picture book that's affordable. And even though it's out of print, you should look for it on eBay or on a Libris. It's well worth getting.
Yeah, that's a good. And then
Say that name again.
the Negro Baseball Leagues: A Photographic History by Phil Phil Dixon Dixon, which is my name. And that was a Casey Award winner. My last book is kind of interesting because I'm taking some different looks on it, and that was the 1910 Chicago Leland Giants. It's a different twist, but it's 450 pages on one team from one season, and it's a Best of Illinois Award winner. So I'm happy to wave my own hand at when you asked that question. That was too easy for me.
Okay, I'm glad you spoke up. I was teeing it up. Who else would like to speak? Carolyn, I'm going to put some put some books in the chat. So you can look in the chat for recommendation, but other people can put them in the chat as well. Carolyn McCreary, you have a question?
Did I miss it, or how did he get his nickname?
It hasn't been mentioned.
Okay.
Well, I will say there are multiple stories about how he got his nickname. I'm going to let the family maybe talk about him, or maybe Phil.
Yeah, I can tell you the story I tell on the road all the time. You see, in the old days, how you got your nickname was be a couple of veteran guys that would sit on the bench. They watched, where they knew where you came from. They watched how you ate. They knew how you dressed. They listened to how you talk and everything. So the story I got from a couple of ball players who played with Turkey, they said that he was down with the Montgomery Gray Sox, came out trying out for the team, and he was out shagging balls in the outfield. And one of those veteran guys said, "Look at that guy. He runs with his chest out." And the other guy said, "Yeah, it looks like a turkey." And they said, "That'll be a good name." And they tagged him Turkey, and he carried that name right to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
That's true, but Dad said he had a pot belly as a kid. That's
right.
what he said.
That's what he said. Ron Teasley says that his teammates. Now, this Ron played with Toledo Cubs in 1945, where Turkey was on the team for part of the season. Of course, Turkey's 44. Ron would have been what, 17 then? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Lydia will correct me if I'm wrong. 17 or 18. And he said his teammates called Turkey Gobbler because when he spoke, got excited, he had a very high-pitched voice. I'm sure that knowing that he was called Turkey Stearnes precipitated that nickname, but I thought that was amusing. But of course, ball players have many, many better nicknames for their teammates than the public knows, many times because they're profane or insulting. And so the clubhouse nicknames are different than the public nicknames. Another story that's often written about, and I don't know how true it is, that Turkey got his nickname because he flapped his arms when he ran the bases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's one of the stories.
it's hard to know which ones are true, but certainly Turkey's story about a childhood nickname um, would have to be given the greatest credibility. Um, Anyway, somebody in the chat asked what ball player would Turkey Stearnes be compared to? I'm going to take that one. I think Turkey Stearnes was, in the way he played and his five-tool skills, a left-handed Willie Mays. He wasn't as great a player as Willie Mays because Willie is one of the very few players who was always in the conversation about the best ball player, black or white, of all time. But he was just below that, and he had all the tools Willie Mays did. Another comparison that I think is as good is Hank Aaron. If Turkey had continued to play another 3 or 4 years, which he could have, given that his 39 and 40 seasons in Kansas City were very, very good. In fact, several writers have picked him, if there were an MVP in 39, I believe, for him being the MVP of the Negro American League. And he was playing with a top-ranked club. The Monarchs were not a bottom-feeding club where Turkey could shine by himself. But he retired in 1941 because if he went back to the Monarchs, he wouldn't have been able to keep his job at the Ford Rouge plant. The UAW had reached a deal with Ford to unionize the plant, and I talked to a UAW historian years ago, and he said, yeah, before unionization, if your supervisor, your foreman liked you, he could say, sure, go play ball for the summer, come back, I'll have your job for you. Once the union comes in, it's a matter of seniority in that. And he said there's no way he could have taken the whole summer off to go playing baseball around the country and come back and had his job back. And so I did manage to find an interview with Turkey in a newspaper in spring of 41 where he talked about he wasn't sure if he was going to go back because he had a good job in Detroit. And then like a month later, he said he decided not to go back because he wanted to keep his job. And that's something he wouldn't have had to do if he were paid better and the black ball players were not paid anywhere near the white ball players. So if he had played another 3 or 4 years till his early 40s, you would have seen, just how great a player he was. Anyway, I think Mays and Aaron in their own way are really good comps. Clem, did you want to provide some comparables?
I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, and that Stan Musial is a pretty good one as well. People have forgotten Stan in recent years, but he's at the tip top with the Ted Williamses of the world. Combination of speed and power.
Okay, anyone else want to tee up a question? Hang on, I'm typing another book into the chat. We're getting a bunch of ones. Okay, so if we're not, Stu, you have a question. You're going to unmute yourself, Stu.
I was just going to ask Vanessa, if you could think of one thing that Major League Baseball should be doing better to engage young people, especially with the stories of the times of the Negro Leaguers, what could it be doing?
It's a good question. I get that question often. I honestly think just being more inclusive about sharing the story. I mean, it's kind of turning me into a situation where, well, first of all, we don't have any celebrations or many celebrations of the Negro Leagues beyond the very few that are within Major League Baseball. So like a Jackie Robinson Day, do people even really realize? And I'm talking about mainstream people, probably not people on this call, but I'm talking about like your average fan or the average person who's just watching, even just maybe because someone they love is watching, right? Do they really know that Jackie played for the Monarchs? Probably not, right? If you ask young people today, they had literally, my students, when I talked about my students earlier, for example, it's been a journey with them, and their teacher is the granddaughter of a Negro Leagues legend, right? They knew Jackie Robinson integrated baseball, but they had never seen the movie 42. They loved Chadwick Boseman because they've seen him in Black Panther. They were shocked to see that he was the star of 42. While we're watching the game, watching the film, they're asking questions about like, wait, oh, so is that the referee? I'm like, no, that's the umpire. It's baseball, right? So, first of all, helping young people fall in love with the game, because obviously it's not being shared with people in the same way that it has been historically. But, obviously making very intentional efforts to talk about the Negro Leagues throughout the whole season, to talk about them much more on social media, to talk about them much more. We just went to the All-Star game. We had the pleasure of doing that through our Negro Leagues Family Alliance last week. And while I was there, I didn't see anything with Grandpa Turkey's name other than there was one section where they had in the All-Star Village the name of all of the Hall of Famers, but they had a specific section dedicated to the Negro Leagues. And don't get me wrong, they did a phenomenal job highlighting Josh Gibson, Will Papa Bell, Satchel Paige, Martin DeHigo, so on and so forth. Even Tony Stone, I believe, was highlighted in it. There's quite a few people highlighted. And I was like, where's Grandpa? I literally walked around that space 3 times, hoping to see him there. So again, what I mentioned before about Grandpa still being invisible to people who know the game, to people who are dedicated to creating content to showcase history, there's a lot of work to be done all around. So the video game, I think, is a great way to get young people involved, as we mentioned multiple times. But there are so many more efforts that need to take place. And it's not just on MLB. This is not a criticism or critique of MLB. I'm just answering the question because you posed it. There's also a dedication and a commitment that needs to happen in school. As an educator, I can say that. I do share information when I'm teaching my English classes, for example, about pop culture, sports culture, all of that, right? And there are names, again, that would be known to everyone. And then there are many hidden figures. So we need to do our homework. We need to stay committed, and we need to continuously show up in ways that honor everyone, not just some.
Well said.
Other questions?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, this is Joe Lapointe. I'd like to ask Vanessa and anybody else, what we can do about Black participation in Major League Baseball. It's down to 6.2%, and which is about 1/3 of what it used to be a half century ago. Why are the young Black kids not playing as much baseball? And how can we change it, get it back to where it was?
I don't know if you can change it to get it back to where it was. Like I mentioned before, I love baseball because of my grandmother. I love baseball because of my grandfather, obviously, right? But to be honest, what did I grow up loving? Basketball. And yes, those things were, present in my household and we watched every sport. But when we're looking at the landscape of what's popular now, I would say for sure basketball, football, and probably even soccer above baseball. It's just not America's pastime as it once was, right? And so there are many reasons for that. But when you talk about trying to get young Black players involved in the game, I mean, even when you drive around and look at local ball fields or the backyards of homes, do you see young Black people throwing the ball around with their dad or with their mom or with siblings? What are we gravitating towards as a culture? I think that's one of the reasons, but also money is one of the biggest reasons too, as well. And I know that's been touched on a little bit during this panel. But when we're looking at generational wealth and how that plays a role, when we're looking at the cost of playing, baseball on elite travel teams and getting to showcases and honing your skills, it's definitely a lofty price. And are people going to pay that? Like, if they do have the money, they're just not putting it towards baseball unless that's something that, again, they've decided they wanted to do from a young age, and probably because their parents or other coaches or mentors have pushed them towards it. I definitely see young people gravitating more towards, like I said, basketball, football, and soccer. But I would love to hear other people's thoughts too.
Well, actually, everything you said, that's true. And growing up in the inner city, if you look at the baseball fields now, they really don't, they're non-existent. So that's a big problem in the inner city, which is why the foundation, the Turkey Stearnes Foundation and the other Black foundations are gravitating towards preserving the legacy by offering clinics and whatever we can to get the kids playing. But I've talked to numerous guys, especially during Negro Leagues weekend, and the average parent, I believe it starts at home. The average parent, especially male, is not interested in teaching their kids how to play baseball. Like you said, basketball is the biggest thing in football. So it's got to start at home, and then we have to provide opportunities for them to play and scholarships in order for them to play in those tournaments and leagues.
Yeah, like Joyce said, it's going to take the community to get involved in that again, especially the parents, because I was at a pre-K through 8 school, and the kids, most of the kids weren't even interested. Some were interested in baseball, but because they didn't see other people doing that, they figured, okay, well, let's do basketball and football. And I would tell them, no. I said, think about what's going on. I said, baseball is not only is it safer than basketball and football. And I said, but you have more of an opportunity than you would to play instead of basketball and football. I said there are only so many players that can play basketball and football. And I said, and look at what's going on with that. I said, so you need to develop some more opportunities for the kids. And it's like Joyce said, it's going to have to start at home, like with anything else. We've got to get the parents and the community interested, because there used to be a time when you saw baseball fields at every school, and now you don't see that. You see basketball and football everywhere, and now they're adding soccer, and so nobody is thinking about baseball. So, and especially in the Black community, so we've got to do better.
I would also mention, I think about my own story. I played baseball, and it was the community that really made me want to play baseball.
Yeah.
And so our community was strong on baseball.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't so much about, we could go and see Kansas City A's at that time. Of course, we can go see the Kansas City Royals. We could go down there. But when I was playing, you know, my biggest heroes were Herman Randall and a guy we used to call Kit Kat. He ended up going to Grambling, and Herman went to Alcorn. And I could see them play, and I wanted to be like them. I watched how they dressed, how they wore their uniform. And on a summer's night, you know, we could have 150 people at the community park. They turn on the lights, you know. A lot of people didn't have air conditioner. So, you know, you come down to the park and we have a good time at a play area for the kids. And it was really a community sport. So I think one thing that will help baseball, especially in the urban cores, if we can become more of a community again, that will help as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
And just to piggyback off that, oh, go ahead, Gary.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa. I wanted to second what Vanessa said. It's very clear the NFL is the biggest sport ever in American history. I used to tell people that if you want to know how popular baseball was before 1960, particularly immediately after World War II, you have to look at the NFL today. But now I don't say that because the NFL is even more popular. It's so dominant, it's unbelievable. I would also agree that the NBA and basketball is past baseball, and soccer, if it hasn't, will sometime soon. What soccer lacks, it's more popular at the amateur level. Just go to any city and look at all the baseball fields that have been converted to soccer pitches. What soccer has lacked in the U.S. is a real passionate fan base for Major League Soccer. And that is growing now. Major League Soccer franchise is expanding and the franchise values are skyrocketing. And people are following European soccer and Latin American soccer clubs. And of course, soccer became the equivalent of Little League in schools in the early 90s, more than 30 years ago. So baseball has really fallen a long way. In some ways, I think it's almost as big a tragedy that Major League Baseball, really the American League and National League, they weren't really merged together back then, in the 60s and 70s, pissed away the legacy of Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby and Satchel Paige and all these great players. They had baseball was the number one sport in Black America, and baseball pissed it away. And it's been a slow, steady decline to where we have the state we have now. Rodney Pearson, my friend Rodney from the Monthly Standard in Detroit, would like to speak. Rodney.
Hi, Gary. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I would like to chime in on this. Yeah, baseball, I think Major League Baseball should invest in the Black community. I think there's a lot of things that they can do. Since 1994, since the strike, I really don't think that Major League Baseball has recovered from that. And for the last 30 years, the NFL, NBA, they've taken over the lead. And what Major League Baseball can do, they can invest in every urban area in every team's city. They can fields. They can remake fields. They could, like you did at Hamtramck Stadium. They have the money to do that for various high schools in their areas. They could donate bats and balls. They could donate tickets to various teams throughout the seasons. They could do anything and everything possible to invite urban teams and urban young Black kids to the ballpark. So they're not selling their sport. They're not selling Major League Baseball to the urban youth. And I think if they were to sell Major League Baseball to the urban youth, the numbers will rise eventually. But it starts first with Major League Baseball. They have to play a major part in it.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. And I agree. I want to say one thing and then I get back to Vanessa since I didn't mean to step on her. It takes decades to repair the damage when you've spent decades destroying participation. and Major League Baseball has invested heavily in the Dominican Republic. And I have nothing against Dominicans, and those kids are great ball players and they love to play the game. And also in Venezuela, and also luring ball players from Cuba and in Puerto Rico, and now in East Asia, Japan, Taiwan, Korea. But for some reason, they don't want to make that investment in Black America. I will give credit to Commissioner Manfred that since he came in, he has really done a bunch of good things for African American amateur baseball and college baseball, including a bunch of tournaments and games highlighting HBCUs and Black kids who are prospects. He's done far more than Commissioner Seelig ever did, and that's good, but it's a long haul and it's going to take a long time to repair the damage. Hopefully it will sometime. Ted, I'm going to ask you to hold on for a second because Vanessa had something to say a bit earlier.
Just really quick, I do want to say MLB does have a ton of programming though that they are utilizing, with like they're doing collaborations with the Players Alliance, for example. They have RBI programs. There's some up and coming programs too that I've witnessed where honestly it's been so cool to see Black kids out there playing. So I don't want anyone to leave this call and think like, oh, MLB's not doing anything or they're not doing enough or they're ignoring this. They're getting that question too. Like this has been something that's been discussed for quite a while. And I do know from going, like I said, to the All-Star game last week, that Friday, there's the HBCU Classic. Right. And Ken Griffey Jr., has a huge hand in that being created. And it was phenomenal to see so many Black people out at the ballpark, out at Truist in Atlanta, having the time of our lives. Black culture was alive, Black celebration, Black joy. Like I said, seeing little Black kids living their best life was one of the coolest things about being at All-Star Weekend. Even better than the home run derby and the All-Star game. One of the best memories I have is seeing the joy on little Black kids' faces during that HBCU Classic, and seeing the high level of talent out there on the field. All right, so there are some things that are being done. We just need to continue to do more. As Gary mentioned too before, let's be real about how history has a role in where we are today, which is why I mentioned the importance of my grandmother keeping the history alive too. All right, that devastation has impacted where we are right now. And it's almost kind of like we have to start over because look at the 1990s, for example. When I'm coming up and watching baseball, who's the biggest Black star of that time? Ken Griffey Jr. How many other people can I really name off the top of my head that I would think people who don't watch sports also would recognize? Right. So there's not as many names in Black baseball that people recognize right away, but people would probably remember Black players from the NBA, of course, during the 90s, or Black players from the NFL during the 90s too. So there's a lot of work to be done. So I just want to make sure to touch on that.
Right. And Vanessa is right. There are many, many good programs now, but it's just so much of a need. I mean, the RBI program, which is a great program, was started, I think, 30 years ago. And it's been around and it's been part of the universe, and yet it still hasn't had a great effect overall. Now, for the kids who play it, it's great. And something like 25 years ago, maybe, MLB started with urban youth academies. These are going to be even better than RBI in that the kids were going to get tutoring and academic skills as well as learning to play baseball. And they started off great, and then it slowed down. I would have thought by now virtually every major league team would have an urban youth academy, and less than half of them do. 5 years ago, I did a presentation at our SABR meeting saying at the rate that MLB was going, it would be till 2045 for every team had an MLB youth academy at the rate they were going. And it's slowed down since then. So MLB loves to talk about urban youth academies and how cool they are, and they are great. But without the local club wanting to open one, you don't have one in a city. And I think that's terrible. That's an opportunity, a great opportunity lost. Anyway, enough from me. Ted Noor. Ted, you're muted. You got to unmute yourself.
Just want to
There
echo
you
what
go.
Vanessa said about MLB. They have done a lot, as every one of us have mentioned. The Hall of Fame is the problem. If where Clem says we need two, I would say maybe even 3 times as many Negro League Hall of Famers as we have today, players. If those numbers were reached, that would boost interest at extremely young ages. I mean, what means more than being a Hall of Famer? So I think, despite all the good the Hall has done from its museum side, they need to put 2 or 3 more times as many players in the Hall as they have in now. That's all I want to say.
Amen, Ted. And Max, I'm going to give you the last question here because we're going to have a surprise shortly that I think you'll all enjoy.
All right, so this isn't so much as a question as a supporting statement to what's been said already. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Max Martinez Almenas, and my uncle was Horatio Rabbit Martinez, 5-time All-Star for the New York Cubans, who also went on to become a talent scout and talent director for the New York/San Francisco Giants, and signed the first wave of Dominicans to enter into MLB, including Juan Marichal, the Alou brothers, Manny Mota, and many more. But to everyone's point about what MLB is doing in terms of supporting black and brown baseball, yeah, they need to do more, but so do we. And I think that the Negro League Family Alliance is really starting to make grounds in terms of getting the word out to the public by creating interactive programs with local kids, so that they're both learning about the game, but they're also learning the history at the same time. Sometimes it's a little unforeseen things. Like I can tell you that I have a softball league in my town, and one of my members told me that his young girls never had an interest in the game of baseball until they saw her dad playing softball with us. And so, sometimes you got to do it through the adults. Sometimes you got to do it through the schools. But we have to do everything and anything we can to get the word out there. And because, Major League Baseball isn't going to do everything. And the other sports aren't going to make our mission any easier. So we all have to do our part to get the word out, because I could tell you from experience that I've only been at this for a few years, but there's even a lot of Dominicans don't know about Rabbit Martinez. And I'm talking about even Dominican players that are standing on the shoulders of not only Rabbit, but my grandfather and his 3 other brothers. So, I think I'm just trying to say that let's keep at it. Let's keep meeting like this, and let's keep thinking out of the box, and keep finding ways to spread the gospel of black and brown baseball.
Yeah, I want to say for the record that Max had a terrific presentation in Cooperstown last year at the Jerry Malloy Conference. I learned so much, and that just says a lot about how there's so much more to learn and so much more to be written about Negro League and Latin American baseball history. We have 1 minute left. Does Joyce, Rosilyn, Vanessa, do any of you want to say something else before we go?
I want to thank everybody for attending today, to taking time out of your schedule to come and celebrate the 25th anniversary with us and carry on my father's legacy.
Yep, keep the legacy alive. We've got to educate people and keep it going. Thank you for being here.
Yep, I'll echo, just continue to do the work, keep showing up. Thank you all for all the love and support you've given. Definitely would end with Grandpa Turkey's, one of his most famous quotes, that it takes 9 men, right? Everybody on the field and off the field too gets the job done. We're all a team, so let's make this world better to honor his legacy one day at a time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again, and I'm going to thank the dandy Adana for sitting in and offering his expertise and his comments. I had forgotten that Dan had been there in 2000. And also thanks for the other panelists, Mike Tiger Price, Clem Hamilton, and the great Phil Dixon. I think I got everybody right.
Right.
Oh, also to Lydia Teasley, who was on earlier. I can't see if she's on now, for recording that nice message from her father, who couldn't be here today.
And Joe Lapointe.
Oh, Joe. Aha. Sorry, Joe. I was worried I was going to forget somebody. And thanks, Joe, for giving us a perspective we wouldn't have otherwise. Okay, folks, we are out of here. It is 6:01. Hopefully, we'll see you again at another meeting. And in a couple of days, this will be available on SABR's YouTube channel. If you want to know I think you can just go to SABR's YouTube channel and find it. But if you can't find the link, send me an email or text me and I'll send you the link when it's posted. Okay?
Before you go, Gary Gillette, today's symposium was the hard work of Gary Gillette. He did almost everything. So thank you so much to bring it to fruition, Gary.
Oh, well, thank you. It's
Yeah,
worth
thank
it.
you, Gary.
Worth
Thank
it
you,
when I
Gary.
see everybody on here and the high level of discourse and the very, very substantial comments, especially by the panelists and family members. So thanks, everybody. We're out of here.